When we talk about rhetoric, there's usually a sort of negative connotation, which is a subjective definition of a word or term. So this means that it's not the dictionary definition. It's based on some other association that we have with a word, either individually or as a society. So when we think of rhetoric, we tend to think of like empty speech or political jargon, that type of thing. So when we're talking about rhetoric in this class, though, we're using Aristotle's definition, which is the art of persuasion. And so Aristotle said that there were four main components of rhetoric, of persuading, of making an argument, and these are the classical rhetorical appeals: pathos, ethos, logos, and kairos. So you may have encountered these three. They're fairly commonly discussed. Kairos, a little less common. Pathos is an emotional appeal. Oops. Pathos is an appeal to emotion. So this can be happiness, sadness, humor, anger, anything like that. So connecting to an audience through emotion. Ethos is an appeal to character or credibility. And this is used to establish why a speaker or a writer or whoever is producing the piece of rhetoric is qualified to make that argument. Logos, to Aristotle, is the most important of the four appeals. Logos is an appeal to logic. Or the argument itself. Kairos is an appeal to timeliness. Or the opportune moment to make an argument. So let's take a look at how these elements are reflected in our own writing. So if we think about a piece of rhetoric that we'll write for this class or that you've written in past English classes, the usual genre for that is the essay. And so in an essay, we typically don't use pathos too much, but we do use it in one specific instance, and that is the hook or the attention grabber. And this is designed to engage your audience emotionally in some way. So you either want to shock them, you want to draw them in by using an interesting personal experience. It establishes that bit of emotional connection between you and your audience. In academic writing, we don't use pathos too much. That can actually be a logical fallacy. Because you want to be making arguments based on ethos, credibility, and logos, logic. So ethos is reflected in our writing, in our use of sources, our breadth and depth of research, So if we're trying to establish ethos in our papers, we're kind of borrowing the credibility of people who are experts in whatever field we're researching, right? So we're on our way to becoming experts, but until we're the ones writing the articles that other people are citing, we're still borrowing that sense of credibility to back up our argument. Logos, so logos being logic itself and the argument that you're making, it's reflected in your thesis. Your use of sources, again, the structure of your argument. And then finally, Kairos is going to be relevant in terms of context. And again, the sense of timeliness. And if we're thinking about timeliness, we're talking about like relevant sources, recent sources. So this is obviously going to depend on the context of what you're writing. Generally, we want to use sources that are as new as possible because that means they're on the cutting edge of whatever field we're writing about, whatever discourse that we're entering into. So let's apply these concepts to an actual piece of rhetoric. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and watch the final speech from the great dictator, which I posted on this page. So with every piece of rhetoric that we analyze, we can use one of the classical appeals as an entry point into our analysis. For this one, I think the most important one is Kairos. Again, the sense of timeliness and providing context to the argument. So this movie came out in 1940. So this is before America entered World War II. This was at the rise of fascism in Europe. So obviously we have Charlie Chaplin playing a caricature of Hitler. But he also plays a Jewish barber. So because he's playing both of these characters, obviously they look exactly the same, and that's part of the comedy of this movie. So the character that you're seeing give this speech is actually the Jewish barber who, through some comedic circumstances, ends up switching with the analog to Hitler. And so he gives this big speech that instead of solidifying the country as like a fascist state, he wants everybody to become free and kind of live in brotherhood. So we have here's the context. If we think in terms of ethos, he's speaking from a very anti-fascist standpoint. So that's kind of the character of his speech. You can also think of him in terms of a person. So Charlie Chaplin was a famous actor. This was actually his first movie with sound. He was famous as a silent actor. So he's using that platform in order to get out his message. If we think in terms of pathos, we can think of the tone of the speech. If we think about how his tone changes throughout the speech, he starts from almost, pleading to humanity's good side. He's trying to reach people's hearts, and then by the end of the speech, he's almost shouting. He's like firing people up. And then in terms of logos, he's kind of saying humans can live together. greed has kind of turned humans against their better nature. But this situation can't last. So obviously, there's a lot of different ways that we can analyze these terms. This is just a basic rundown, and you can really apply this to any uh, type of rhetoric, whether it's written or spoken, or even a piece of artwork.